Hello, welcome to another video lecture. Another day in my room. Sad, empty room. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're talking about the decline of the radical Republicans. All right, we're moving pretty quick. We just learned about what the radical Republicans did in power. Don't worry, our next assignment will help us backtrack and review some of that stuff. Anyway, let's talk about how exactly the radical Republicans went from having total control of almost every branch of government in all of the United States to losing that power and the end of Reconstruction in the South. We got a lot of moving parts here. All right, let's get going. So, the decline of radical control. All right. A lot of this has to do with the Grant administration. And what you're going to see here is actually nothing new ever happens in history, and it's all the same. And the old phrase goes, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And while those who do know history are doomed to sit around and watch everyone else repeat it. There's really no changing what's going to happen. Okay, here is so the Grant administration. Okay, Ulysses S. Grant was the Army general under Lincoln, commander of the Army. One of the main reasons why the Union won the Civil War, right? He does not have political or economic experience, okay? Which means he's going to have to rely on his cabinet. Now, for those of you that don't know what a cabinet is, okay, it's the president's staff, right? The president doesn't enforce the laws all by himself. He has departments and staffs that go ahead and do that, right? So he has to appoint these cabinet members. He's going to have to rely on them to kind of execute his agenda. Grant does a really bad job of choosing cabinet members. There's some of his family members. He trusts them like blindly. Like Grant's an Army guy. So he's going to say, okay, honesty is number one, right? And if you tell me you didn't do the thing, I'm going to believe you and I'm going to defend you. It's not how politics works, Ulysses. It's not how politics works. Anyway, so what happens is we have a lot of corruption in the cabinet. And because Grant's not that skilled of a politician, like if you want him to move in like an open field and like defend a hill, like if I want someone to defend a hill in Civil War, I'm going for Ulysses S. Grant, okay? If I want someone to respond to a scandal, definitely not that guy, okay? He does not handle the scandals well at all. And a lot of the things he does, he's being genuine and trying to like figure out what's going on with these scandals, and it just makes it look like he's covering it up, like he's that inept. Okay, so some of the scandals are, pretty intricate. Some of them aren't so much. Like there were these fake postal routes that people were delivering mail on and just accepting government money, right? Like that's some of the basic stuff. Others involve like manipulating gold prices. Okay. Okay, the Grant administration has so many scandals. They have their own Wikipedia page for all these scandals, right? Right here. I mean, just an entire list. Now, it's important to understand that this administration is not really more or less scandalous than any other administration in the late 1800s. It's a pretty common occurrence until there's an age of reform in the early 1900s, right? So, there's a narrative that's going to get spun that like, oh, radicals were corrupt and all that kind of stuff. It's not necessarily that's the case, okay? All right, now the Grant administration is going to be defined by that corruption. That's going to hurt the Republican Party's image overall. Okay, Grant's not going to handle the scandals well, and that's going to lead to part of the decline of the radicals. Another factor that's going to come into radical decline is the Panic of 1873, right? And economic panic is just another word that we use for depression. Okay, this was actually called the Great Depression before the Great Depression, right? They changed the name of it because the Great Depression was that great. They're like, there's much greater depression in this depression. We got to change that. Let's call it a panic. Okay. Anyway, so it's a Panic of 1873. It's just a fancy way to say economic depression. Now, this is going to have two major effects. And remember, Grant's not the best in terms of economics, right? So the things that he's going to do, not all Republicans are going to agree with. right? And also the Republican Party was formed on the idea of abolition. So now you're introducing a new idea that they don't have that collective agreement on, okay? So it's going to split the Republican Party. It's not going to have that 3-to-1 like block like does when it comes to Reconstruction politics. And it's going to shift focus away from Reconstruction politics, where now instead of just like, ensuring, well, how are we going to get the South back in the Union? What are we going to do to ensure the rights of freedmen? Now you're introducing a different political issue. And as people, as the Depression wanes, people become tired of Reconstruction politics and they just want to focus on themselves and their own economic success, right? So as focus shifts away from Reconstruction politics, it also shifts away from radical control. Okay, there's a number of issues that go into like the cause of the Panic of 1873. We won't really get into that now, but mostly it's overextending investments into the railroad industry, and then Grant's money supply issue, where he takes money out of the economy and they stop printing silver coins and all that kind of stuff. Okay, more on that in a future unit. Okay, in addition to scandals weakening the party and economic depression shifting focus away from Reconstruction politics, we also have a new force in the South known as the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, Ku Klux Klan still around today. Okay, it's going to primarily rely on intimidation. Okay, but it's also a very effective political group, especially through the 1920s. Okay, membership kind of goes up until they peak in the 20s, and you have a very effective political force, right? Now, the actual actions of the Klan were outlawed in the Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 1871, but that did very little to actually stop the Klan from operating. It just moved to the shadows more, okay? The Democrats, along with the Ku Klux Klan, are very effective at defining the elections as a racial struggle. So instead of poor white farmers voting with radical Republicans who are also helping poor white farmers, they're going to vote with that old Southern elite. Right? Even though they don't really benefit from their policies as much, the societal changes that they don't want to see happen with freedmen gaining rights is enough to keep them voting against their own economic success, so to speak. Okay, that'd be a little oversimplified version of it. But we see culture and societal, voting patterns matter. Okay, and you guys have to remember too, they thought that they could become that Southern elite. They wanted to go from here to here. And the more competition they had doing that, the worse it was for them. So another reason why they're going to vote with the Democrats instead of the radical Republicans. All right. So they're defining elections as a racial struggle. Moreover, the Ku Klux Klan is going to use intimidation against carpetbaggers, scalawags, and freedmen. Now, I don't think we've defined those words yet. So let's take a brief moment to do that, right? A carpetbagger is a northern citizen who moves south seeking political office or economic gain. So cities in the north moving south are called carpetbaggers because their suitcase was like a bag of carpet. Anyway, so they're moving south trying to seek political office, or maybe they want to start a factory there. They have money and they're going to invest and start a factory. Right? They're trying to gain politically or economically. And the scalawag is a Southern citizen who supported Republican politics. If you Google scalawag, you're going to find like mangy mutt. So I'm sure on my assignment today, I'm gonna get answers like mangy mutt. And that's how I know you're watching the video or not. Gotcha. All right. Anyway, so this is supposed to be a derogatory term. You're calling them dogs, right? The South is so good at spinning narratives that we still learn about the words that they introduce today. Because if you read about Reconstruction in history, you're going to see words like carpetbagger and scalawag. And that's how good they are at spinning this narrative. And they spin this narrative of corrupt government, of failed Reconstruction governments. And they're doing that for a reason. They want to convince people that these so-called Reconstruction governments failed, mostly because these Reconstruction governments were elected by voting Black Americans. And if they can convince, and it had carpetbaggers and scalawags in it, and if they can convince them that carpetbaggers and scalawags and freedmen all together create a corrupt and inefficient government, then they can justify voting against carpetbaggers and taking power away from freedmen. I think the phrase they'll use is something like, they clearly aren't ready yet, right? And that means, oh, we'll give you your political rights just later when you're ready. But they'll keep just moving those goalposts, right? It's a way to take away political power from the freedmen, this narrative that they're going to spin. So these words are very much a part of that narrative, right? Now, voter suppression or disenfranchisement, we just talked about, right? Important word there, disenfranchisement, to take away political power, okay? This is going to be a main strategy of the Democrats in gaining power in the South, but especially after Reconstruction ends and they have that power, they're going to shore it up by taking away people's right to vote. It's just a word of warning. Anyone who wants to take away other people's rights to vote or make it harder for other people to vote probably aren't really concerned about the things they're saying they're concerned about, and are more concerned about not letting a certain group of people vote because they're going to vote against them, right? Southerners in the 1800s weren't concerned about the lack of education for freedmen. They didn't want freedmen to vote for Republicans, so they took that power away. Look for that in the modern day elections. Who's trying to take away people's right to vote? Who's trying to make it harder for people to vote? Why are they saying it? And who will that stop from voting? Okay, another way they suppress freedmen's votes, besides violence, poll taxes and literacy tests, right? Poll taxes are fees that are required to vote. Okay, it takes $2, which is about half a week's wages, or a couple days' wages to vote, right? $2 now doesn't seem like much, but if you adjust for inflation, it's quite a bit back then. And they also have literacy tests, meaning you have to pass a test in order to vote. Now, freedmen were denied an education for the longest time. So very few could actually read and write, and very few could afford to read and write and pay the poll tax. So mostly it's freedmen being affected now of this. But there are those poor white Southerners who are trying to vote with the Democrats. Why would the Democrats take away the poor white Southerners' vote? They didn't. They introduced something called the grandfather clause, which said if your grandfather could vote, so can you. Freedmen did not have grandfathers that could vote in the South. Poor white Southerners did. So these poor white Southerners were grandfathered into voting. Again, you have two classes of laws. You got voting rights for some people and not voting rights for another. Okay, you'd think the 14th Amendment would overturn that. More on that later, all right? Let's give another example of intimidation, all right? This is a picture that was put into an Alabama newspaper in the late 1860s. And it basically shows, right, two people who have been hanged. Yes, that's the past tense of the word hung or hang, to kill, right? It's hanged. Anyway, two people have been hanged, and this is an Ohio carpetbagger, right? He's got a suitcase that says Ohio on it, and then this would be a scalawag. And it says a prospective scene. And this had a whole bunch of writing underneath here that was saying, this is what's going to happen to you if you come to the South and try to change our society, right? So it's clear and obvious intimidation and threats trying to preserve their former way of life. Okay. Now, all of this, right? So we have the actions of the KKK. We have the slow disenfranchisement of Black Americans, the narrative that is being spun, the economic panic of 1873, and the scandals of the Grant administration all weaken the Republican Party to the point where in 1876, we're going to have a very competitive presidential election between Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, and the Democrat Samuel Tilden. During this election, 20 electoral votes are going to be disputed in the South. Here is an electoral map. Okay, so the votes that were disputed come from Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. And basically, they're disputed because of claims of fraud. Both sides are claiming in different areas, right, that certain people are stuffing the ballot. So there are illegal votes coming in, fake votes. They're putting so many votes in that, you know, there's no way this person won that, right? Or they're throwing votes out or losing votes or all that kind of stuff, right? So both sides are claiming fraud to the point where neither side, neither state legislature can decide who they're going to send for electors, right? They can't come to an agreement on who actually won the election in these states. And so the federal Congress, not really having much guideline from the Constitution, there's rules of like, what if neither candidate can get to 200 and now today 270 electoral votes, but what if neither candidate can get over half the electoral votes, right? But there's no rule book in the Constitution that's like, what if 3 votes or 20 electoral votes from 3 states, just, we don't know who gets them, right? And these matter, right? This is not like, you know, a few states in the 2020 election where they could swing either way. It wouldn't really change the outcome. Look, Rutherford B. Hayes ends up winning by 1 electoral college vote. He needs all 20 of these votes. And he loses the popular vote, if you notice that. Anyway, he needs all 20 electoral college votes that are disputed. Congress sets up this commission, right? The Electoral Commission of 1876. And it's got the members on it right here. You'll see a Republican and Democrat. I know I'm using Wikipedia. Okay, it's fine for this kind of stuff. Anyway, it's a Republican and Democratic commission. And they have to decide who actually won these things. So they're going to go to these states and they're going to investigate these, voting practices and try to figure out who won. Okay. Now, they end up deciding that Hayes won the presidency. Okay. And they give all 20 electoral votes to Hayes. Okay. And though it wasn't official, historians recognize that there was a compromise that was struck, right? And that is the Compromise of 1877. Hayes was made president, and in exchange, the military control was removed from the South. Effectively, what this means is we have a return to local rule, where now the South is Democrat, and they're going to continue to operate separate from the Republican North, right? And you see the Reconstruction era comes to an end. We're going to look more at this in the next video. Did it end too soon? Did they accomplish their goals in Reconstruction? Was it a success? But we know for a fact that Reconstruction ended before equal rights could be guaranteed to the freedmen. And we're going to talk more about that in the next one.